Hello, Dr. Cinema here. I apologize for this really weird angle. I'm still trying to figure out what should be my usual spot for certain videos like Movie Face Off. I'm testing this one out, but I can probably tell this probably isn't the best way to do it. Oh well. So today we're talking about Happy Death Day and Happy Death Day to You. So I actually didn't watch the first Happy Death Day in theaters. I keep reminding myself there are good PG-13 horror films, but my instinct is always to just skip them. But it's made by Blumhouse, so I decided to give it a chance so that I can see the next one in theaters. The first one was pretty enjoyable, and this one's pretty enjoyable too. But to make sure I don't get caught in a time loop, I have Quachi. He's actually really good with stopping weird movie signs from happening to my videos. Also, I have no budget. You may laugh that I have Quachi on my videos with me, but at least he's not wearing a baby mask. That's the one thing I can't get past with these movies. So anyway, this movie Face Off is going to be a little different. Instead of my usual 5 rounds, we're just going to be focusing on 3 rounds. I figured this was easier to do since the movies are really similar to one another in a lot of respects. So, without further ado, let's get started. Round 1, Story. The story of Happy Death Day is that Tree, a college student, wakes up in the dorm room of Carter and his roommate Ryan, but he's not in the dorm room when the movie begins. And she's a little bit of a bitch, but she's still got like that cool personality kind of thing going for her. And it's the day of her birthday, Monday the 18th. And on the night of her birthday, she gets killed by a guy in a baby mask. But as soon as she gets killed, she wakes up back on the morning of Monday the 18th, and soon she figures out she's caught in a time loop and that she has to figure out a way to get out of it. So that's Groundhog meets slasher film. Now let's do the second film story. It starts off immediately right after the first film on Tuesday the 19th. And this time we start focusing on Ryan for a little bit until he repeats the same day for the first time, Tuesday the 19th, after getting killed. And quickly he tells his roommate Carter and his, I guess now technically girlfriend Tree, and they immediately get to the conclusion time loop somehow got passed on to him. And in an effort to try to stop like this thing from happening again, Tree gets knocked into another dimension which is slightly different from her own, but she's still caught in the same time loop. And now she has to figure out a way to close the loop and decide whether or not she wants to go back to her own dimension. So those are basically the stories of both these films. I don't want to get too much into like how the stories feel because I got a separate round for that, but let's look at the technicals of both of these films. The first one is a little bit more of a simpler, straightforward story structure, while the second film, while a little more complicated, does offer some new and exciting stuff that can be done in the story. And it does help explain why exactly in the first film she was caught in that time loop. Although you could make the argument that we didn't really need that explanation because it was just an enjoyable film. Though I will admit for the story for the second film, it may go on for a little too long. There's this thing where you think this is going to be the end of the film, but then they stretch it out for a little bit more. They did that with the first film, but it was to a slightly lesser extent, and it was to help serve a more of a genuine plot twist. And while there probably was some people that saw that one coming, it did really serve a more general sense of that story. With the second film, the extension of the ending just feels like it goes on for a little too long. Not a lot, just a little bit. But I still enjoyed it. Although, you could make the argument that makes this film a little bit less balanced. So, I'm going to give this round to the first one. Now let's move on to round 2. Cast. Right off the bat, Jessica Rothe as Tree is pretty much perfect in both of these films. Great comedic timing, charisma, and when it's time to do some of the more dramatic moments, she really does a great job. I'm not going to lie. She's really great in this role. And a lot of the supporting cast is pretty good. But let's start off talking about the killer. The killer in the first film was interesting and could have been done a lot more with his character in terms of like how to use him in the story, but he was still an interesting part of the movie. Although, like I said, they probably could have used him a little bit more in that movie. Kind of hard to explain, but that's how I feel. In the second movie, there is still a killer, but it's really more of like a side note in this movie. Not really the main focus of this movie, which is interesting and does serve the general atmosphere of that movie, but it is something worth talking about. And of course, the rest of the supporting cast, there's Carter, who's pretty good in both films, and Ryan, who's really just there in the first movie, but really gets more of an expanded role in the second film, which I always like when movies do that. Take a character from a previous movie that didn't really do a lot and give him more of a bigger role in the next film. I always like that when movies do that. And the second movie generally does a few more things with different supporting characters that the previous film really didn't, which does make it a little bit more fun and interesting. So I'm giving this round to the second film. Now let's move on to the third and final round, the atmosphere of the film. Like I said previously, the first Happy Death Day is what happens when you make Groundhog Day a slasher film. It's simple, but it is a kind of a novelty in the sense that we really haven't seen these two kinds of genres mashed up together. And the second film, it has slasher elements in it, but it does take on more of a Back to the Future 2 kind of vibe in terms of its science fiction narrative. And it does have a dark sense of humor, which for the most part does work pretty well. They're really two very different movies in terms of atmosphere. Similar, but pretty different. It's really impossible. I shouldn't say impossible because I'm comparing them right now. But it does make it pretty difficult to decide which one has more of a, I guess, better atmosphere. I don't know where I was going originally with that sentence. I saw the second movie with a friend, and he pointed out that in the second film, the novelty of time loop slasher kind of like story was a little bit worn out in the second film. I kind of disagree in a way, but I see where he's coming from. Because the second film, generally, in terms of story, is a little bit more complicated by introducing a sort of multiverse into this fictional world. And in the first film, the novelty of Groundhog Day and Slasher is more unique and more interesting to watch first time around. I'm not saying they didn't do enough stuff in the second film to make it more interesting, but in terms of the actual Groundhog Day aspect of the film, it has become a little less of a novelty in Happy Death Day to You. But there are still some pretty enjoyable stuff to see in this second film. But in terms of atmosphere and like how interesting it is to watch it, I'm going to give this round to the first film. I'm going to go with my friend on this. I'm going to give the round and the face-off to the first Happy Death Day. Although I do think that in several respects, the second film is a little bit better, but generally I probably will go back to the first film a little bit more often. Weird way of saying that. But that's all I really have to say for right now. These two movies are pretty enjoyable, not gonna lie. Blumhouse is taking over the horror genre. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It's a good thing. I'm telling you that now. Anyway, like, comment, subscribe, share, and see you guys next time.